Wow. Okay, now we're actually live. So I'm gonna put this one and see if it works.
Perfect.
Oh shit, now it's... okay, it's the opposite. Now, why is it... Yeah, now it's
Like
right.
this. Hi everyone.
Damn it, what's wrong anyway? Okay, now I have to stand over here. Anyhow, that's... välkomna till kvällens livesändning med Vinkompassen. Vi ska köra fullt fokus på Australien ikväll och vi har ett fullspäckat schema med hela 9 viner. Inte 8 som jag höll på att skriva i eventet tidigare idag, utan vi har 9 viner. Det innebär att vi kommer hålla ett ganska tight schema, ganska intensivt. Vi kommer att prova på snacka på engelska. Jag vill bara snacka lite för er först. Och som sagt så kör vi den här klassiska att kommentera jättegärna hur många ni är som tittar tillsammans. Om ni har köpt vinerna som ni, så vi vet om ni provar samma. Är det någonting, ni får jättegärna kommentera om ljud och bild och sånt funkar. Men nu så kör vi igång på engelska. And I need to introduce my friend here, who is Gerard.
Yeah, or Jed
or
to
Jed.
my friends. So
or Jeddan, who I actually learned that you're
yeah,
called.
I'm also a fish in
He's
Sweden,
also a
which is pretty hilarious. But I would gladly accept that Swedish nickname. So nice to meet you all. I'm Gerard Higgins. I am from Australia, from a little place just north of Sydney called the Hunter Valley. I have been living here in Sweden now for too long not to speak Swedish. So
too long.
Yeah,
so we should do this one in Swedish today, or?
I'd rather talk in English if that's okay with everyone. Of course, I'm sure you can understand. But hopefully today is a really great introduction to Australian wine to the many of you that are tasting everywhere. So a bit of a background about me really quickly.
That would be nice.
I,
Who
like
are you,
am a sommelier.
Yeah.
So I've been working in restaurants for, about 10 years, I think, before I moved to Sweden. And now I'm here working for a big company, a company called Pernod Ricard, that's famous, of course, for owning Absolute Vodka in this country. But we also own a wine brand in Australia called Jacob's Creek, and we'll be tasting one of those wines a bit later. But I moved to Sweden a few years ago. I'm now here studying and selling wine, talking about wine, studying my Master of Wine as well, one of 5 or 6 people in Sweden doing that. So I'm proudly representing Sweden over in London at the Institute of Masters of Wine, which is pretty exciting stuff.
That's exciting. So you're actually studying, for people who don't know, you're studying to become a master sommelier, which is huge.
Yeah.
Or master of wine.
Master of wine.
Sorry, because that's a big difference. Master of wine.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Important.
So there's 400 of them in the world, and I think Sweden has 3. 2 of them, unfortunately, are locked away in the dungeons of Systembolaget. So they're not really accessible to the Swedish population. So there's one lady in Sweden called Madeleine Stenroth, who is my mentor actually. She signed me onto the program. And I know Daniella's done tastings with her in the past, so perhaps on Vinkompassen soon.
Soon, very soon with...
I hope she's available.
She is.
Just roped her into a tasting, sorry.
It's okay, we already have one booked, so don't worry.
Okay, good.
We will do a tasting with Madeleine soon again. Actually in end of March, and she will be I think she will be doing it from South Africa.
Oh,
because
great.
I think she just arrived.
Yes.
To do a harvest, right?
She was just back down
Anyhow,
there.
we're not here to talk about Madeleine today.
Or South Africa.
Or South Africa. Today is all about Australia. Should we start with showing a map?
Yeah, let's talk about map. We're wine people. If you haven't gathered, wine people have a map obsession.
Yeah.
I think if we were all reincarnated, we'd come back as map. What do you call map people? What are they called? Cartographers. We'd all come back as cartographers. I know I would. A cartography, I don't know, cow or bird or something. That'd be nice. So let's have a look at a map of Australia and talk about where all the wine in Australia is made. So I don't know how many of you have been down to Australia. I can see there's an Aussie on there saying
there's
hello.
There's an Aussie here. One Aussie in Vejbystrand.
Yeah,
Angela.
Cool. Great. Hey,
hello.
Angela. So for those of you who haven't been down to I haven't been down to Australia. It's a big place. Australia, if you were to fly from one side to another, it'd be like flying from London to Tbilisi in Georgia. So it's a huge country. It takes us about 6 hours to fly from Sydney to Perth. It's 3 time zones, I think, you cross to get across the country. So continental Europe would fit all the way inside it. And it's a massive deserted country. It's a huge desert. And that means we can't grow things in the middle of the country, essentially. So most of the population lives around the edge, and it's a bit cooler on the edges on the south and the eastern coasts of the country, because there's a big iceberg in the south of the Pacific Ocean called Antarctica, which keeps things nice and cool. So it allows us to grow really good quality fruit. So today we're going to be tasting wine, I think, from 5 states. That's pretty impressive stuff. So we're doing a quick flyby in 1 hour of Australia. So I hope you're all buckled up and ready to go, because it's going to be quite a fast adventure around our massive country. But as you'll see during the tasting, Australia is a country of massive diversity in regards to the wines that we can produce. So if you can imagine the diversity of wines that they're able to produce, say, in Europe, we can do that in Australia as well, because of the sheer size of our geography. So don't just lump Australia into, I guess, one basket as a country that produces, small amounts of bag-in-box wine. That's not what we do. We're actually much more of a diverse, I think, wine producer than that.
And I would say, we said, let's talk about Australia in a tasting, and it's quite difficult to take such a big winery, country.
Well, I think,
this is, I remember you and I talked about, should we do New Zealand and
Yeah,
Australia?
that's what
and
I was going to say.
You're stupid.
I wasn't quite that cruel.
No, but seriously, talking about, this is also why we have so many wines today, because we want to show the broad spectrum of the country.
We want to show the diversity of climates, the diversity of wine styles, and also the diversity of cultures that's contributed to the Australian wine story. That's another thing as well. Australia is the product of multiculturalism, in a sense. And a lot of people have brought their traditions from all over Europe, Sweden included. No winemakers from Sweden, though, have come down to Oz. But there's lots of different cultures down there, which means that we've ended up with some quite interesting and some unique wine styles as well, one of which we'll be tasting today.
Should we actually, should we go ahead and start with the 2 wines, and what do you say?
Yeah, totally, I think so. Let's start with the 2 whites. So I don't know how people are doing this at home. I think maybe some of you have bought some of the wines, and maybe not all of them, who knows? Some of the keen tasters potentially have bought all of them, and they're buckling in for a big, Wednesday night? Thursday night? What day is it? My gosh. With coronavirus, I never know where I am or what day it is. So, hopefully we can, have a big Thursday night wine tasting.
It's Thursday night, and we start with the Riesling and the Semillon. Actually, the Semillon first, right?
Yes, so we're going to start, with the Hunter.
Well, we can taste them side by side.
I've got 2 glasses here, and I always think the best way to taste wine is to always pour yourself 2 glasses, because you've got something to compare to. When you're tasting wine in isolation, it's really difficult to understand a wine sort of by itself. But if you're smelling it side by side, another thing, it shows you how 2 different things, or the 2 different wines in the glasses are different. So I think a good way to start is by tasting these 2 wines. So we've got the Hunter Valley Semillon from Tyrrell. So the Hunter Valley, of course, we've got a map here, I think,
and that
on
is
screen.
Let's see, where is
New South Wales. There we are.
I'm totally right. Perfect.
So you can see on this map, if it's on your screen big enough for you to read the regions, the Hunter literally sits in the very middle of the map just there. So it's sort of in the center of New South Wales. Some people might get angry at me for saying this, but it's the furthest north that you can grow quality wine in Australia. The Hunter and Mudgee are sort of the northern limit of quality wine production in Australia, and the world for that matter as well. Some of the highest latitude or the lowest latitude wine growing regions in the world. The Hunter Valley is actually classed as a subtropical wine region, which is pretty crazy. It means that we get our summer rain during harvest, which is not the best thing if you're a wine producing region, but we struggle and we I guess are pegged against the odds every year. And some years we make great wine, and other years we make more ordinary wine. I think we're tasting the 2018 vintage.
We're tasting the 2018, but I think a lot of people might have the 2019 because I think they just changed vintage.
Okay.
Monopoly.
All right.
Just one second. Jag vill bara dubbelkolla hur ljudet är, om det är något fel. För jag ser att någon har kommenterat att ljudet inte är bra. Men någon annan har kommenterat att det är bra. Så ge oss en tumme upp om ljudet är bra. Eller inte en tumme upp, utan kommentera. Ljudet är bra. Så kan vi bara, så att jag har det utrett. För det kan ju vara så att det är bra, men att det kanske inte är det hos någon. Men då kanske inte beror på oss. Men bara så att jag vet innan vi fortsätter. Sounds fine. Perfekt. Okay, let's go. I just wanted to do a sound check.
Okay, good. Sounds fine. Great. Let's
okay,
go.
Perfect.
Let's
Then
continue.
it's all done. Thank you very much, people.
Cool.
Guys.
So the reason why I wanted to taste both of these wines side by side was not only to show off my home region, the Hunter Valley, but to also show off Australian Riesling. So Australia, not many people would know, is actually, after Germany, the second largest producer of Riesling in the world, funnily enough. And that's because of our German immigration that happened back in the mid-19th century, so in the 1850s. And we had two groups of Germans come to Australia for two different reasons. We won't get into that. One boat ended up in the Hunter Valley, and the other boat ended up down in South Australia in the Clare Valley and the Eden Valley. And these are both areas that are known for their Rieslings in two different forms. And I say Riesling in reference to the Hunter, because up until the 1990s, Hunter Valley Semillon was called Hunter River Riesling. But then they realized it wasn't the Riesling grape that they were making the wine out of, so they had to tell people honestly on the label what they were putting in the bottle. But anyway, we've got in front of us the German tradition in two different forms, using the two grapes that were available to the immigrants at the time. So in South Australia, they had the Riesling grape down there already, so they were able to make Riesling-style wines from the Riesling grape. Whereas in the Hunter Valley, it was a little bit different. The Brits had already come to the Hunter Valley, and the Brits were already planting grapes that they were turning into ports and sweet wines, because that's what the British were into at the time. Fortified wines were their tradition. And instead, the Germans took the grapes that they were using and made a dry Riesling style of wine using the Semillon grape. And that's how Hunter Valley Semillon came about. And now it's the only dry Semillon, low alcohol Semillon, produced anywhere in the world, including Europe. It's not produced anywhere in Europe. So quite proudly, I can stand in front of you all and show you Australia's only unique wine style, which comes from where I grew up.
And this is
pretty cool.
Really interesting. I think this, like, with the low alcohol, is very special for the Hunter Valley, right?
Yeah, definitely.
The Semillon is really, it's a very interesting style of wine. And like, what people don't really think of is that it has huge aging potential.
Massive aging potential. So I think at the moment you can get from Systembolaget on the ordering assortment some aged examples from 2013. So they're really starting to open up and become more straw-like and savoury. But what happens to these wines is when you age them in the cellar, they get this really lovely golden colour to them, and they honey out. They become really sort of rich and full-bodied. And it's for that reason, I think, well, not I think, I know, it's for that reason that Hunter Valley Semillon is really famous around the world. But when you smell this wine, if everyone has a smell, or those of you who have this at home, it's very much a non-fruited style of wine. So when you smell white wine, you're used to smelling like lovely fruit characters, like maybe peaches in Chardonnay or passion fruit in Sauvignon Blanc. In Hunter Valley Semillon, you don't get that. It's very savoury. It smells like straw and hay and things like that. It doesn't necessarily smell like fruit. So a lot of people do find it to be a very challenging style. But nonetheless, it's super important to start with Hunter Valley Semillon because it is Australia's only unique wine style. Nobody else makes this stuff in the world. And when it is older, it is quite an interesting wine. So I recommend people buy a couple of bottles of these, throw it in your potato cellar, forget about it, and come back in 15 or so years' time and have a look at the magic, I guess, of Hunter Valley Semillon.
Yeah, I think I have a question here about do you know the sugar level of this?
So yeah, this wine would be bone dry. Traditionally, all Hunter Valley Semillons are bone dry. And when I say bone dry, I mean less than 4 grams of sugar are recorded. There are some producers that I know of that are releasing Semillon to be drunk early with a tiny bit of residual sugar, maybe 7 or 8 grams. But all the wines we're tasting today are technically dry. This conversation about dryness and sweetness doesn't happen in Australia. We don't have that conversation with our wines because the tradition in Australia is to ferment all our wines to dryness because we don't have problems with cold weather and stuck ferments. It's quite easy to ferment wine in such a hot place.
I think this one is a good question then at the same time. Are there any sweet wines made of Semillon in Australia?
Yeah, totally.
Totally, a lot of them,
Yeah, there
right?
are, but not in the Hunter. So the Hunter, we get rain, as I was saying, every year during harvest. And when you get rain on your grapes, they tend to rot. So we need much drier places in order to make sweet wine. And there's a place sort of in the deserted centre of Australia called the Riverina, where we are able to keep the bunches on the vines for a longer period of time. So the Riverina is famous for its Botrytis Semillon. So similar to the style of wine that they're making in Bordeaux, in Sauternes. Not exactly the same, but similar. And that is what I would consider to be the flagship of sweet Semillon in Australia. But, you know, like sweet Semillon everywhere else, it's a hard sell. No one these days is buying
really
sweet
trendy
wine. Yeah. Everyone says sell it to China, but you know the Chinese don't like white wine, they don't like cold wine, they don't like sugar. So it's a really, really difficult proposition in the Asian market as well. Sweet wines are just not very trendy at the moment.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's taste some Riesling, hey?
Let's taste the Riesling. We have a comment here that I think the wine is a perfect wine for aging. And yes, we definitely agree on that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely.
Completely.
Put it in your cellar and forget about it.
One more tip before we move on. If any of you see in the system the release of Tyrrell's Vat 1, that is the flagship wine from the Hunter Valley for aging. So if you're interested in buying Semillon from the Hunter for aging, I would recommend you purchase Vat 1, and the wine that we're drinking today is sort of more for drinking now, in a sense. But let's try the Riesling, and I'd like you all to sort of compare them side by side if you do have both wines in front of you. So just smell one and smell the other. And you can see now with the Riesling, it's much more fruity. There's much more fruit words we can use to describe the liquid inside this glass. So it's more about lemons and limes. It's quite pretty. It's almost got like a waxy character to it, sort of a bit like apple skin as well. Oh,
I love the acidity. It's beautiful. Syran i det här är magisk tycker jag.
And when you taste a South Australian Riesling, I think you really get a true sort of honest representation of what Riesling is meant to be. So not only does Australia make the second largest amount of Riesling in the world, it's all Riesling true to form. So it's not Riesling that's being in a different style of Australian Riesling. They are bone dry Rieslings. Once again, less than 4 grams of residual sugar in Australian Riesling. Why? Because we can't grow the grapes or leave the grapes on the vines long enough to have sweeter styles of Riesling in Australia. It's simply too hot. But these are wines that are balanced, that have really wonderful acidities to them. And I think they're really excellent to pair with food. So like Hunter Valley Semillon, I guess this is a really food-friendly style of wine. It's got that acidity that just cuts right through any fat or any richness that you have in the food. And, you know, a country like Sweden that's quite a lover of dairy products. I think Riesling is a really, really good pairing with anything with dairy fat in it. So really great wines that are suited to Swedish cuisine, most definitely. And hey, everyone loves modern Asian food these days as well.
Riesling, perfect.
Riesling and Semillon for that matter. Both these wines I think do really, really nicely. Yeah.
They're beautiful.
Yeah.
Would you say Riesling, is there a place in Australia where they usually come from, or do they grow Riesling in many different places? Or
so Riesling is a bit of an interesting grape. It's a grape that has a really long growing season. It's a grape that likes to hang on the vines for a long period of time. So it requires that of the places in which it's grown. And the only places really that can do that are cooler climates and cooler places. where, you know, the Riesling grapes can just hang out on the vines for a period. So in South Australia, we've got two places called the Clear Valley and the Eden Valley. I need to stop playing with these bottle caps. I have a habit of playing with bottle caps. I'm just gonna
I'm hiding behind the map here, and now we can South Australia.
So South Australia, you can see right in the centre there, once again, there's a little valley there called the Clare Valley. And the Clare Valley sits just on the side of a small mountain range called the Flinders Mountain Range, which gives it just enough altitude to cool it down slightly. And then you've got the Eden Valley sitting down next to the Barossa. The Barossa is sort of this weird valley that has two very definite levels with a big mountain range in the middle of them. So the lower section grows Shiraz, which we'll talk about a bit later. But the higher section is famous for sort of cooler climate Rieslings and Chardonnays. And even they're producing a lot of Shiraz that they're calling Syrah up there. Yeah. So more that cooler climate, peppery style of Syrah. So the Barossa is actually quite a flexible region, but I'd recommend those places. Outside of that, in New South Wales, there's an area called Canberra District, which is not a very well-known region, I think, in Sweden, but it's a region that's quite cool, where we built our nation's capital, sort of like Australia's Brasilia. It was a capital city that was built up from scratch out of the ground when Sydney and Melbourne were having a fight with each other. They built a capital city right in the middle. But they're actually well known for wine as well. So they're growing some really nice Riesling there too. But apart from that, of course, we've got Hunter River Riesling, Hunter Semillon, or Sem, as we call it in the Hunter. Yeah,
Sem and the Rids.
Yeah, Sem Risen Chard is what we're tasting today.
Are we doing Chard now? Because
Should
I
we
think
do some Chardy? Let's have a taste.
Because we have so many wines to go through, so
I'm gonna get stuck talking, I think. No, we've still got plenty of time.
We got plenty of time, but we got plenty of wines.
So
vi går över till Chardonnay. Let's do Chardonnay.
Sorry, I'm so rude. I didn't pour you a tasting.
There we go. I don't think a lot of people have the Tolpuddle, but I think a lot of people might have the Oxford Landing, because that one is actually available. It's a new wine in the stores.
Yeah, that's good. If people have that, it's a great wine, so it's good to have that one to taste. But likewise, it's nice to see it alongside Tolpuddle.
We have a good question here, though.
Yeah.
Because we didn't mention it. Organic. All the wines, because that's a good one.
Yeah, so we were meant to talk about that at the beginning.
Yeah.
So organic in Australia is a bit of an interesting topic. Let's have a chat about that topic right now.
Yeah.
So the majority of organic wine in Sweden is sold under £100 price point per bottle. Australia has one of the highest minimum wages in the world. Australia and New Zealand actually introduced the minimum wage in the 1980s. And at the moment, that minimum wage sits at about 130 crowns an hour for a vineyard worker. So in paying our staff good prices, it means that it's very difficult for Australian producers to produce organic wine under that 100 crown price point. So there are lots of ecological organic wines that exist from Australia, but we just don't see them in Sweden that much and that often. I think at the moment in the standard assortment, there are 3 products that exist on shelf that are organic. And of those 3 products, one of those products are actually made by the producer, which is the Jacob's Creek we're going to taste later. And I'll tell you how we do it for a cheap price
when we get to that
wine. But if people are interested in organic, I would try and encourage people to drink wine above that 100 crown price point, simply because if you are buying organic wine under 100 crowns in the system in Sweden, somebody somewhere within the value chain is getting screwed over. And usually that ends up being the grower. So the only way to pay a fair price for fruit and sell the wine in Sweden or anywhere in that world, for that matter, at a sub 100 crown price point, is to grow the fruit yourself. And that's what we're doing at Jacob's Creek. And I'll talk about that when we get there. But ecological in Australia, of course, it's an important thing. But that being said, there are sort of more pressing issues at heart in Australia in terms of the production of wine, and they are water sustainability and land management. So we've got really big problems with erosion, salinity, and water. And so those issues lie at the front line, really, of the things we talk about and we need to manage in Australia within our industry. That being said, there are quite a few organic growers. It's becoming much more popular, and we're watching the category expand every day. But I implore everybody online who's watching, if you are interested in buying organic wine, that you're paying a good price for it, because coming from a family of growers, I don't like to see growers pay the lowest common denominator for their fruit. But it does exist.
It does exist.
Yeah.
Before we go into Chardonnay, which we need to do, we have a question here regarding something that we talked about before we started tasting.
What was it?
It could be about screw cap.
Ah, screw caps.
Here's someone that says, I don't have any of the wines tonight. Are there screw caps of most of them? And yes, there are on all of them.
Every wine is a
Every
screw
wine
cap.
tonight is screw cap.
So yeah, that's an interesting topic of conversation. Australia and New Zealand led the world. Now Austria, funnily enough, as well. But Australia and New Zealand led the world in the introduction of screw caps in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think it was in 2002 that all Riesling producers and most Semillon producers converted entirely to screw cap. And the reason for that is because the cork producers of this world, without mentioning where they come from, or what country they're from, got in the habit of sending all their bad corks to Australia, to New World producers, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, and places like that. Why? Because these people from this country would prefer to have cheaper Australian wines corked than super expensive Bordeaux and Burgundies. So you ended up with a lot of the lower grade cork going down to Australia. We didn't have the knowledge about cork taint that we did in the 90s. So you had a lot of people using things like chlorine to clean their wineries. And that combination of things just blew up in our faces. And we ended up, there was a 5-year period really between, in the late 90s it was, between 95 and 2000, where there were so many cork bottles of wine, a huge percentage of cork bottles of wine. And so the Australian producers in the end, New Zealand producers as well, just said, you know what, screw it. We're not going to support the cork industry anymore. Let's invest in screw caps. Let's start to perfect the technology. And now that we're, 25 years into that journey, screw caps, in my professional opinion, rival the best corks on the market. So if anybody's told you that screw caps aren't good, that was true 25 years ago. But contemporary knowledge would say that the oxygen transfer rate inside the screw caps themselves are equally as good as cork, with, of course, the added guarantee that you'll never have a corked bottle of wine. So where the technology is at the moment, if I were making wine, I would put my wine under screw cap most definitely.
I think that we can have a whole own tasting or webinar about screw cap and aging about screw caps and all of that, because that's such an interesting. Maybe we should do that in the future.
Well, are you saying this with knowledge of the bottle under screw cap that I have at home?
No.
So funnily enough, I have a 1998 Tyrrell's VAT 1 from the original screw cap trial sitting in my apartment in Stockholm.
You should not have told me.
No, I shouldn't have.
Okay,
let's
taste Chardonnay.
It's the only one in Scandinavia, so maybe it's a good excuse to taste it. All right, let's taste Chardonnay. It's super important because we've got two really great wines tonight, both made by a very famous family in Australia called the Hill-Smith family. And the Hill-Smiths have been around since the beginning of wine in South Australia, more or less. And they are owners of very diverse productions all around South Australia and Tasmania. And we've got two wines from them tonight. So we've got the Oxford Landing Chardonnay, which is a wine that I really enjoy. It's from the Riverland. And the Riverland, if we pull up a map of South Australia...
there we go.
...is... right there on the right-hand side of the map, you can see this area called the Riverland.
It looks like, ser ut som en fyrkant liksom, längst till höger.
Yeah, so it's like a long... the reason why it looks like that is because...
It looks like a box.
It follows Australia's longest river, like along its river course. Hence, Riverland. So the Riverland is a place where we can produce really high-quality grapes in South Australia at a really good price. So most of the wines that you're buying that are South Australia appellated or Southeastern Australia appellated will actually have a Riverland component in them. And I think what Oxford Landing is really good at doing is expressing the quality of fruit that Australian wine is known for. So in Australia, of course, many of you are aware, we have this wonderful thing called the sun that allows us to ripen really beautiful, juicy grapes. And to make good wine, you need really beautiful, ripe grapes. And the Riverland, we get that in spades. And so when you smell this wine, it's beautifully fruity. And I would argue at price, if you were to taste this alongside other European wines, because of the sun, you're getting a more full-bodied, more fruity experience in Australian wine than, say, its European counterparts at price, of course. So when we're talking about wine at price, I mean, I'm never going to compare an Australian bottle of wine at, what's this price, this wine?
And I think it's 99.
Yeah, I'm never going to compare a 99 crown Australian wine with a 200 crown bottle of like French Sancerre or something like that.
But you can't, because you need to. Exactly.
So at price, I think this performs really, really well.
No, I think, yeah, you get a lot of wine for the money comparing to what you would get if you would be in Europe or something, somewhere around, I would say.
Definitely. And this is a wine that's got a nice fruit character. There's a little bit of oak in there as well. This wine spent some time on oak. So it's got plenty of flavor. It's got a nice richness to it, a nice ripeness to it, I think. An Australian Chardonnay in general is known for that slight richness. But the cool thing about Australian Chardonnay is we're starting to see them become fresher again.
A lot.
And that's because of picking times. We're picking our Chardonnays a bit earlier. So they're a bit better balanced than they were 10, 20 years ago, I think.
We actually got a question, what does it taste? So I think you explained it very well just here. So what does the wine taste?
What does this wine taste like? So to me, this wine...
The Oxford Landing.
Yeah, the Oxford Landing Chardonnay. So to me, this wine tastes a bit like, it's got a light, sort of like white peachy note to it. To me, this also has a little green element to it as well. So it's like herbs and peaches. It's like, imagine having peach with mint and like a nice dollop of like whipped cream on top of it. That's what this wine tastes like. It tastes like dessert in a sense, without being sweet.
Someone just said Piggelin. Have you tried? You had the ice cream.
Yeah,
Piggelin.
yeah.
The green one.
I can see that as well.
I can see that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the reason why it's got a little bit of creaminess to it is not only the oak, but the wine's probably gone through a little bit of that malolactic conversion that all the wine geeks like to talk about in terms of Chardonnay.
Mellow, yeah.
So there it is. I can tick that off my...
No, it's check.
Yeah, check. We don't need to talk about that again. But it's I think a lot of wine for the money. So
it's
that
a lot of, yeah, definitely. Okay, so now we've been to Riverland. We have next to it, we have a Chardonnay that I don't think a lot of people have because there were just like a few bottles left in one store in Sweden. But I chose this wine because we're going to just mention Tasmania.
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty cool thing to talk about in terms of Australia.
Need the map.
So if we pull a map up.
There we go.
Tassie. So that's,
Tassie.
Well, in Australian, Tasmania is called Tassie. And Tassie is the little island that sits off the south coast of Australia down in this really stormy sea called the Bass Strait. It's
I can show the big map.
Yeah,
there
let's
we
have a look
Tasmania.
at the big map. So you can see it's orange. Just right down there in the bottom of the map is Tasmania. So Tasmania being in the middle of this very cold ocean, once again because of that iceberg called Antarctica, it's a region that is very well suited to producing cool climate varieties. So we've got a lot of Chardonnay planted there, we've got a lot of Pinot Noir planted there, and they're exploring a few other cool climate varieties there as well. But it's still a very new place, I think, in the grand narrative of Australian wine.
They make sparkling wine as well,
Lots
right?
of sparkling.
Lots of sparkling.
Yeah, so I guess that tells you how cold it is down there. If they're making sparkling wine there, it's a relatively cool place. But the reason why I think we wanted to show this evening is because not only does it show the diversity of the Yalumba portfolio between Oxford Landing, really high quality Riverland Chardonnay, and Tolpuddle, a really high quality Tasmanian Chardonnay, it shows you the diversity of Chardonnay styles that are available from Australia. That thing we were talking about before, Australia being a huge country full of diverse wine styles and things like that. So the Tolpuddle is a bit of a different style of wine. When you smell this one, it smells a lot like grilled yellow peaches. It's a lot more rich and full-bodied and packed with flavour than the Oxford Landing.
But this is also, we need to mention, this is a totally different price range. We can't compare them to each other. This is, this is $3.79, the other one is $99.
Sorry, we should have made that disclaimer before I started talking about this style about this wine.
But this is such a beautiful wine. And what Australia, I think, is a little bit famous for, or was not famous, but ABC, anything but Chardonnay.
Yeah.
This is so different from that style.
Completely different. Yeah, completely. So Australia, funnily enough, became famous for Chardonnay back in the 80s.
Sunshine in a bottle.
Sunshine in a bottle. Yeah, exactly. Back in the 80s in the UK. Really, really famous. And thankfully now we've shaken that image off to an extent, and we're making much more smart wine. And exploring cooler climates is one of the tools which we're using as Australians to really explore the diversity of Chardonnay that we can produce in Oz. But anyway, that's Tolpuddle.
Wow, what an acidity.
Yeah, definitely.
I haven't tried this before, so this was really interesting to try.
Yeah.
It's always fun to try new wine when you have people in front of you like this.
Exactly.
But the acidity is, wow, and that's because of this Tasmanian cooler climate. And
exactly.
It's great.
Yeah, so the cold ocean surrounding Tasmania, it's a beautiful place to go on holiday to. So if anybody find yourself down in Australia, someday, I recommend you take a plane down to Hobart. There's a really wonderful museum down there, and it's surrounded by wine regions and beautiful scenery. Just don't bring your swimmers because it's really, really cold in the sea around Tasmania.
Are there sharks around there as well?
In Tassie, not really.
No?
There's sharks everywhere, let's be serious. Sharks, snakes and spiders.
Yeah.
There's Tasmanian devils in Tasmania,
Oh, yeah.
which is super cool.
I remember that program, the TV show, when I was a kid.
Looney Tunes, Taz.
Yeah, Taz.
Yeah.
The Tasmanian devil.
So they're real, they exist. But all the sharks are over near Perth, which is where this next wine comes from. That's a perfect segue.
That's a perfect. Let's try. We'll see if anyone has this, because this is a really fun, interesting wine. Cullen, but we need to have, let's see. And we are, that's wrong. We need the, let's see what map it is.
The WA map, here it is. Cool.
There we go. I put it in the middle. That's perfect.
So this is Western Australia. In Australia, we're lazy, so we just call it WA. And WA is a huge state. It's Australia's largest state. It takes up probably more than a third. I don't know. I'm making up facts now. It takes up half of Australia. It's huge. And there's a tiny little place where people live. There's a tiny little place where people can grow anything. Once again, because of this iceberg in the south of the Pacific Ocean. But we're on the Indian Ocean side now. So it's an iceberg, the same iceberg in the south of another ocean. And it cools down this southwestern tip just enough to grow quality fruit. And sticking out into the ocean, and you can see on the map just here, oh, look, I'm pointing to it on the screen.
Yeah, you are.
Margaret River.
That's a camera down there,
Just there. Oh, it's perfect. And Margaret River is known for two things, surfing and really high quality wine. They're mostly known for Cabernet, funnily enough, but we decided to show something a bit left of centre tonight, just to show the diversity of Australian wine styles that exist outside of the normal white and red and rosé. So this is an orange wine. You can see in the glass, or you can see in the bottle actually, the image of Cullen on the screen there, how orange it looks.
There you go.
Yeah, it
looked like a sweet sauterne.
It does, but it's not sweet at all.
It's definitely not sweet.
Don't be surprised when you taste this one. So this is a wine that's actually called amber.
Yeah.
Because of the colour. And it's made by a wonderful lady called Vanya Cullen. And Vanya is super famous in Australian wine circles because she is the woman who introduced biodynamics to Australia. So biodynamic practice is sort of a voodoo hippie way of growing grapes, I guess, according to moon cycles, which is the way people used to do things in Europe way back when we were sort of, I guess, more connected to the planet than we are today.
Yeah.
But anyway, she introduced this way of growing grapes to Australia. Not only that, she is one of Australia's most famous female winemakers, and she became famous at a time where there weren't that many women in Australian wine, so she really is a pioneer in terms of bringing many women into the industry, which is great, I think, because I should say it, women can make wine just as well as men. Let's not forget
cheers
that fact.
For that one.
Yeah, cheers to that.
Cheers to that. Women in wine.
Yeah, women in wine. And Vanya really is a really inspirational person when you meet her, and is making some really wonderful wines to match. So if ever you see Cullen on shelf at Systemet, go for it. The wines are a little bit expensive, but I think they're made in such a wonderful way. Once again, biodynamics, like organics, is a more expensive way of making wine or growing grapes, because you need to have you need to spend a lot of time in the vineyards. So it means that there's a lot of man hours required. We were talking about that expensive minimum wage, so you can see the price just ticking up. But I really think that wines like these are worth every cent.
And a question here, if it's also bone dry, and yes, it's definitely dry.
Yeah.
This is bone dry. And this is beautiful, and I love, with this orange style, I love the texture you get.
Exactly. So
really like chewing on the wine almost.
Yeah,
like
it is tannin. So it's tannin like a red wine. Maybe some of you have never come across orange wine before. Orange wine is a traditional way of making wine in Georgia, and it's where they use the big clay pots out in their backyards that they dug into the earth. And instead of taking the wine off the skins with the white grapes, they just threw all the grapes into the pot and sort of waited. And when the wine came out, instead of being white, because the skins were involved, it had this orange color and a natural tannin. So I always think of, whenever I talk about orange wine, I always use tea as words in the tasting notes. Because I think the wines have a lot of similarities with really fine teas, not black teas, but more sort of white teas and sort of semi-fermented teas, semi-fermented green teas like oolong.
I've never thought about that. That's a really good, yeah.
Here you go, you learn something new every day.
That's perfect. I love having these masters study.
No, not yet. Not yet.
You know, Madeleine, and then you. This is like my own masterclass, but you know, private class here.
With 1,000 friends.
With 1,000 friends, something like that. Yeah. But I don't know how many friends we are. It depends on how many people you are in front of a screen. I can see that we are 188 screens, but I don't know how many people. So we'll see. Champagne tea. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that is a good one.
But you know what? We have loads of red wine.
Oh my gosh, we need to keep going.
We need to keep going.
So...
Quick taste on the Yara Pinot, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Daniella.
There we go. And
so we've got 4
right.
red wines to taste, and we wanted to show you a diversity of styles once again. We're going to a state that we haven't tasted wine from yet, a place called Victoria. And there's a lovely big city called Melbourne.
Oh,
that's the capital of Victoria, like Sydney. It's a city of 5 million people. We're a country of 25 million people in Australia. So we are sort of a medium-sized country, I guess, in a sense. But we've got some quite large cities. So where you have large cities, you have wine regions that sort of end up being the playground of the lawyers and the doctors and all that sort of stuff. And where the lawyers and the doctors plant vineyards, there's always a lot of Pinot and Chardonnay. So we thought we would show a Pinot from the Yarra Valley today. And this is a really great example of what the Yarra Valley is capable of, I think, in terms of Pinot Noir. This is also something that's available on shelf in the fixed assortment in premium stores.
Yes, in premium stores. And that's something I had to try out today, because I wrote in the event that we have these 8 wines to try. And I totally forgot that we had this wine as well. So
you know what? In order to do Punt Road a favour, because you forgot about them, let's introduce this other Punt Road wine that I brought along so we could taste it side by side.
Yeah.
This is also in TSEs at the moment.
Yeah, and I have a question here if we share the list of the wine. All the wines, alla viner finns listade i evenemanget om den här provningen. Så där finns alla artikelnummer. Så att det finns redan och det finns informationen om själva sändningen. So people have all the information about the wines we try.
Good.
But this was in the tillfälliga sortimentet.
Yeah.
Forgot about what it's called in English.
The temporary assortment.
Temporary assortment.
That's
There
it.
we go.
It starts with a T as well. It's nice and easy. So this is both of these wines. Let's just talk about, thanks Daniella, let's talk about what the Yarra Valley is in general. It's a cool climate wine region, once again, that sits just above Tasmania. And when we look at a map of Victoria, can we pull up a map of Victoria?
Yeah. Let's see.
When we look at a map of Victoria, just to the south of this map is Tasmania. So it's the same cold ocean with that same big iceberg that's cooling down Victoria, and it cools down the Yarra Valley equally. The Yarra Valley sits just to the northeast of that grey bit, and the grey bit is the city of Melbourne, quite a large city.
Just make this one bigger, quick.
Yeah,
there we go.
There we can see that.
Not the nicest way, but there you go.
The Yarra Valley is a place that is constantly whipped by cold breezes that come across the Southern Ocean. So we've got a nice cool place to be growing Pinot Noir. Most of Australia's good Pinot Noir, I'd say, is grown in Victoria. And this is a really nice example of it. It's a wine that I think smells really delicately fruity, but also there's a nice sort of a smoke character to it as well, which adds complexity, and a nice little bit of green herbalness to it as well, which is kind of a stylistic thing that you see a lot of in Burgundy these days too.
Definitely.
Yeah, so in terms of on-trend styles of Pinot that you don't have to pay a lot of money for, this is a really good wine for the price, I think. Yeah. If you were drinking
I would agree.
like American Pinot, like Santa Barbara Pinot, it'd be twice the price. Yeah. Or Burgundy, forget about it. Like
you won't get a Burgundy in this. You won't even get a Burgundy in this price.
I think good or drinkable Burgundy starts at like 400 crowns these days. It's just not accessible. Would you agree?
I would agree. There are some maybe a little bit lower price, but not if you compare the quality.
Yeah.
You pay the triple than this.
Well, I'd like your cheap Burgundy list, please. But this is a trap.
I would like your
Yeah, it's
Someone
a trap.
says that it was really good for duck.
For duck, yes.
Cheers.
Okay, let's talk about that. Duck and Pinot. So when you open up the sommelier's textbook, it's this book that doesn't exist, but for the purposes of this conversation, we're all opening up the sommelier's textbook. On the first page, the first 3 words you will read are duck and Pinot. Full stop. That's it. It is the number one pairing that everybody at home should know about.
I just need to use this function for this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's the first thing that everybody should know in terms of food and wine pairing. Why does it work? Pinot has acidity. Once again, we're talking about acidity in terms of food and wine pairing. So it's a functional wine to drink with duck in that the acid cuts through the fat in the meat. And then you've got sort of this red cherry-like character to it. And if you go to France and you eat duck, what do they serve with your duck? They serve you cherry jam or something on the side of like confit duck leg. So this is both the cherry jam next to the confit and a really great functional way to cut through the fat in that dish. So perfect pairing. If you haven't tried duck and Pinot, I recommend it. Likewise, actually a really great Scandinavian theme pairing, not necessarily Swedish theme pairing, more Norwegian theme pairing, Pinot and salmon.
Really? Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, of
really,
course.
really good pairing. I recommend that.
Would you say cooked salmon or
Totally, no, yeah, it has to be cooked.
Not the gravad lax?
No, preferably with the skin on, so you're still getting quite a bit of fat underneath the skin as well.
Then I'm with you.
Yeah,
definitely.
Totally. But not gravad lax or even, smoked would work slightly, but not as well as just a cooked fillet of salmon.
I got a question in the event today. What should, do you have recommendation on what we can eat or something like that? And I was like, okay, we have so many different wines, so I can't really recommend anything. Cheese and cured meat is always perfect. But the only thing I could think of when talking about Australia was like Vegemite and kangaroo. What do you eat in Australia?
Not much.
Kangaroo.
No, we eat lots of different things. So the most famous dish I think from Australia is the dessert pavlova.
Ooh.
If there are any New Zealanders watching this evening, I challenge them to the origins of pavlova. It has been proven time and time again that this dish is in fact from Australia, so we claim that rightfully. I'd say that's probably the most famous thing that we make or cook. But another interesting thing, once again because of our multiculturalism, in Australia, modern Asian cuisine is our own. So in Stockholm, there's a really famous restaurant called Farang. I'm sure many of you have been. And that restaurant actually was started by a guy who learnt how to cook modern Asian food in Sydney at a restaurant called Longrain, which started the modern Asian cuisine. So this sort of modern Asian, pan-Asian that borrows flavors from Southeast Asia, flavors from China, from all over the place, developed because of Australia's multiculturalism, and now it's world famous.
Yeah.
So the next time you're out at your Asian fusion restaurant, I'm sure that's opening up in your town.
Australia.
Think about Australia, and please enjoy a glass of Australian wine because it's incredibly appropriate.
Maybe a Riesling, or maybe...
Or a Hunter Valley Semillon.
Or Hunter Valley Semillon. Or
a Pinot.
Or Gamay, because we have a Gamay in front of us.
Or a Gamay. So, Gamay. That's a bit weird.
That's a bit weird. How did this one end up in the line? Because we didn't have it. We have 10 wines now. Why did you do this to me?
Well,
but why did we have the Gamay? Because
we thought we'd show it because we forgot about Punt Road.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
So now we're giving them double the screen time. But we can take that away. Punt Road's got 2 wines available now. Let's have a taste of the last 3 wines before we need to call it quits, I think.
We have loads of time. We have almost 10 minutes.
Almost. Gosh.
Almost 10 minutes.
All right, so...
I actually bring them all here, but we can talk them...
Oh, let's talk about them all at the same time.
Not at the same time,
of.
but we can at least have them...
One by one.
We talk about them one by one, but we have them on screen together.
Yeah.
So they will get a lot of time.
That's
a lot of
JC.
airtime. There we go, what we're doing here. There we go. That's the Okay, so we start with the Jacob's Creek Organic Shiraz Cabernet. How is it possible, since you were talking about that you need to pay more above 100 kronor, how is it possible to make a, let's see, it's 79 kroners. I need to bring this, yeah, there we go. How is it possible to make a wine for 79 kroners organic in Australia?
So we sell this in the Scandinavian markets only. And the reason why we sell this in the Scandinavian markets is because we know that the markets value organic. And the only way that we can do it and still turn a profit is by using fruit that comes from our own vineyards. So look, you can talk about wine until the cows come home, as we'd say in Australia. But at the end of the day, wine is business, and wine businesses still need to make money in producing and selling their wine. So the way that we're doing it, we've got a 300 hectare organic vineyard in a place called Langhorne Creek, and we take the majority of fruit from that to make this wine. We also buy some organic fruit at a fair price from growers in the Riverland as well. So the Oxford Landing and this wine have a lot in common. And the way that we do it is by sort of subsidizing the price of that organic fruit from the other Jacob's Creek Classic that we sell everywhere else around the world. So we probably should be selling this wine for a lot more money. It represents a lot of value, but really the reason why it exists in the market is because we're offering what the market wants, more or less. We're delivering to market need, which is super important. So Jacob's Creek is a wine that's been on shelf forever. I think it was probably one of the first brands that was in the market just after brands could come into the monopoly. And if you haven't tried it in a while, I recommend you buy a bottle and you have a taste, because we've moved away from sort of a more oaky style, and we're moving towards more of a pure fruit characteristic, which modern Australia is known for. And we'll talk about pure fruit when we're talking about first drop, because first drop sort of represents the new Barossa and the new guard and sort of making wines with purity and vibrance. And I really think that Jacob's Creek these days is the embodiment of that. And as a bonus, it's organic. So for 79 crowns...
It's really prisvärt, says someone here.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's back to the same conversation with the Oxford Landing Chardonnay, right? Yeah. Once again, we've got the sun in Oz. It's, something we can rely on. So we can grow really good quality fruit, whatever the grape may be. And in this case, Shiraz and Cabernet, which is a really Aussie blend. Funnily enough, you'd never have a Shiraz Cabernet in France. That's like sacrilegious. In Australia, we can do it, and it gives us wines that are really fruit forward and generous in terms of their style. And that's something that wine at 79 crowns from Italy or even Spain or France wouldn't be able to achieve necessarily at that price point once again.
What would you serve to this wine?
This goes really well with meats. So funnily enough, in Australia, I would serve this with a kangaroo steak.
Yeah.
Yeah. But applying that to Sweden, I think this wine, no, I actually would. Why is everyone laughing?
I don't know.
We've got a cameraman laughing over here, not taking me seriously. You're
we
laughing.
love you, that's why. We love you, that's why.
But I'd drink this with kangaroo.
We're not used to kangaroo.
I'm not used to reindeers, and I'm not laughing.
That's true. Sorry, ursäkta, det är bara fantastiskt roligt på jobbet
Yeah,
idag.
exactly. All right, serious
We're having
faces.
fun.
So I would drink this with kangaroo. Why? Because kangaroo in Australia is a lot like moose here. It's quite a dry, lean meat. It is.
I actually tried kangaroo when I was in Sweden.
You did?
Yeah,
it's probably horrible.
Yeah, no, it was actually really good. I was 4 days in Melbourne and I had 1 day in Jeanneret. That's the only place I've been to. And I had a kangaroo.
Did you go to one of these animals restaurants where you can eat all the Australian animals under the sun?
No.
Actually, fun fact, guys watching at home, the kangaroo is our national animal. It's part of our national emblem, and we are the only country in the world that eats our national animal. Isn't that great?
That's great.
Yeah, crazy, right? We're crazy people.
What's our national animal? I don't even know. Is it moose or is it? I don't even know. Someone's
probably
watching.
Like some species of
please,
duck.
what is Sweden's national animal?
Is it a
please
strange
help me.
bird? Is it a moose?
I don't know,
like
but
to know.
someone knows. So probably min svärfar, my father-in-law, watching. He is watching. I saw that he was. He said that he wasn't going to watch. Okay, anyhow.
Back to this. I would eat this with kangaroo, but if I were to compare this to Sweden, I would eat it with something like moose. So a drier style of meat. To me, Australian wines, they're so fruity. This is the berry sauce that goes with the meatballs.
Yeah.
Or, any...
I would definitely meatballs, the creamy sauce, the lingonberry jam.
Yeah, or even if you don't want to have this is the lingen. Like literally.
Yeah.
This is what you use that for. Skip the lingen and drink a glass of Jacob's Creek Shiraz Cab Organic. I think that is a really great way to go.
We don't have, people know the answer, we don't have a national animal, we have an animal for every region or something like that. Gotland apparently has igelkott. What's igelkott? It's, what's it called? Hallå, igelkott. Vad heter det på engelska? Okay, skip it.
We'll skip it. Anyway, Gotland has an animal. That's nice.
Those small animals with tags on. What's their
tags?
Called? Yeah.
Anyway, let's a hedgehog.
Hedgehog.
Thank you. Alrighty. Yeah, they're cute.
This is the best tasting I've ever had.
We have echidnas.
Yeah,
our hedgehogs lay eggs. They're called monotremes.
Let's go to the Shiraz before we start.
So let's have a quick taste of the first drop. So first drop is part of the new wave of the Barossa Valley.
Do you have that in your glass?
Yep. Yeah, I do. They've taken over. Once again, I haven't poured you. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
They've taken over the Tanunda train station and they're making a really fruit-forward style of wine that is more representative of the new Barossa, I'd say. So it's more about really bright fruited Shiraz. There's not too much wood. They don't age this wine in oak barrels for a long period of time. So it's more about, once again, this vibrance of fruit, this sunshine in a glass sort of thing. The quality of fruit that we can produce in Australia is most definitely here in the glass. So a really great style of wine, I think. Really balanced. It's got freshness. It's got acidity. Once again, it's a wine that I would happily drink in.
It's really fresh.
In similar situations to the JC.
Refreshing and.
Definitely. And to speed things up, because I can see we've only got sort of a minute.
And don't worry, we can if we go on for 5 more minutes, don't worry. We need to talk about St. Hugo's, the Cunavera cab.
Yeah, we need to talk about St. Hugo.
Yes. I don't know if anyone has bought that wine, but
yeah, I
think someone has.
I think it's here. I know we had some issues with shipping with this one. The wine was stuck on a boat somewhere between here and the Suez Canal. So
you didn't pour to me
wine,
again.
Hey?
There we
I
go.
didn't pour it. I'm so sorry.
Are you really a
I'm
sommelier?
greedy. Yeah, exactly. I haven't been a sommelier in long enough. But we thought we'd show this wine because it sort of represents what Australian wine does very well and what Australian wine has been producing for quite many years. And I think it's a style of wine that many of you will recognize if you're drinkers of Australian wine. So St. Hugo's based in an area in South Australia called Coonawarra. If we bring up the map, you'll see that...
And that would be
South Australia.
South Australia, there we go again.
You'll see that Coonawarra is all the way down in the very bottom of that map there.
Yep.
So all the way down, you've got Coonawarra in the centre. It's about 500 kilometres south of the Barossa. So it takes about 5 hours in a car or a 45-minute helicopter ride if you want to be a bit of a thrill seeker. But the reason why Coonawarra is so special for growing grapes in Australia and the reason why Systembolaget continues to stock Coonawarra wine is because of the soil. So this is what's called Australia's limestone coast. And what it is, it's a fossilized seabed rather, not a riverbed, a fossilized seabed that slowly over time has pushed its way out of the ocean. So you end up with this layer of calcium in the soil, which Bordeaux grapes really like. Because funnily enough, as you probably know, Daniella, in Bordeaux, there's this really famous type of soil that's made out of starfish. And that's where a lot of the really famous wines in Bordeaux are grown, be they Cabernet or not. But still, this calcium of starfish, calcaire d'astière, is super famous in terms of a soil type within Bordeaux. So when they discovered this in Australia in the 1970s, this was an old fruit growing area. They thought, oh wow, we really need to plant this to grapes. So Coonawarra is producing really, really great Cabernet wines that are not dissimilar to the French wines in a sense. And by that I mean they've got this really beautiful sort of rich fruit note to them, but also this nice sort of delicate, elegant leafiness to them as well. And that's because of their maritime location. I could talk about a big iceberg in the south of the Pacific Ocean, but I won't. But like Bordeaux, it's a maritime wine region. It has calcium soils. It's got really beautiful sunshine, which gives us really ripe fruit. And Coonawarra for Cabernet, I think, is a really, really wonderful place. And at the same time, these wines age really nicely too. I really recommend people buy some bottles of St. Hugo Coonawarra Cabernet and age them in their cellars for, you could age them for 5 years, 10 years. It's going to drink really well. But it is a wine that, because of its generosity of fruit, you can drink straight away as well. So I guess unlike the wines of Europe, which are very savoury, which are very difficult to drink in their youth, they're very tannic, Australian wine in general, I would say, in its youth has a generosity that makes it very accessible. So you can buy it and either drink it or cellar it. But I think the statistic is something like 95% of purchases are drunk within
24 hours.
Yeah,
I think,
24 hours of purchase. Yeah. So if you're buying it to cellar it and you drink it, don't worry. We're all in the same boat.
No, but this is really, and what I think about, like most of the wine, all of the wines that we have tried today or tonight, they're so food friendly.
Oh,
like
completely.
you can pair them with so many things, and they all, what do you eat to your Coonawarra St. Hugo?
Well, I'd eat crocodile with... No, I'm joking. I am joking. No, I wouldn't eat crocodile with this at all. I'd drink crocodile with eat crocodile and drink Chardonnay probably. With this, I would probably... It's quite a conservative wine. So this is a more conservative wine style. It's very much about big fruit, big oak, structuring the wine up to age for a period of time. I definitely recommend this sort of with a more traditional beef dish. So I would say with a I don't know my Swedish beef cuts, but with like a ribeye steak.
Yep.
So beef that has a line of...
A lot of fat.
Yeah, a line of fat running through it, so you've got some really nice flavour. But likewise, for the people that don't really eat beef out there, I know that there's a lot of vegetarians around in Sweden especially. Any sort of protein would work really nicely with this as well. So sort of like a bean-derived meat replacement. This is a really great thing to pair with. So black bean burgers, lots of soy-derived protein replacements or soy-derived meat replacements. I would recommend this style of wine with most definitely.
It's a beautiful wine.
Yeah.
We're gonna wrap this up very soon. If you have tasted any of the wines, do you have a favorite wine that you tried today, this evening? And yeah, any questions for Gäddan? Go on right now before we say goodbye for this evening. Entrecôte with
exactly.
a good potato gratin.
You're exactly correct. I would say that entrecôte is a perfect pairing for this final wine.
Lagringen på påse. This is a question I don't know. The question is the aging in a bag of the mother's milk. What do you know? Actually, this I need to check because she had. I don't know what she means. Go on, say something, and I have.
I don't represent the mother's milk guys. I'm not quite sure, but mothers in Australia, the saying "mother's milk" is sort of like. Mother's milk is the most beautiful thing you could ever drink. So I imagine that what these guys are alluding to when they're talking about mother's milk in the first drop wine is that first drop Shiraz is so delicious, it's a really wonderful thing to drink. You'd say, there's a phrase in Australia, it's like mother's milk. And that would mean that it's, one of the most delicious things you could ever taste. And I imagine that's sort of where that name comes from, rather than aging in any sort of sack like in the Spanish times.
This is a really good question to end with, I think. What is coming in trend with wines in Australia?
Okay, that's a really good question.
I think that's a really good question.
So in Australia, we were talking about being the custodians of our very strange environment that we have in Australia, our grand desert nation. But I think that understanding our country a bit better as Europeans who have found ourselves in an alien place is going to very much be sort of in the foreground of what trends are coming in the future. So how that translates to wine, I would say, is looking towards more appropriate grapes within the Australian landscape. So grapes like Pinot Noir and Chardonnay that are very, very water intensive. Cabernet is incredibly water intensive. I think in the future we'll find a lot of these being replaced with Southern European varieties that thrive in warmer, hotter environments. So grapes like Aglianico, a lot of Sicilian grapes like Nero d'Avola. In terms of whites, there's a lot of grapes like Fiano and lots of different grapes that come from Southern Europe, stuff like Moscato d'Alexandria, stuff like that, that is easier to grow because it's adapted over the last few thousand years in Europe to grow in drier climates. I think that's what's going to happen. In Australia, we call them alternative varieties. We're starting to see examples of those appear on shelf here in Systembolaget in Sweden. So I know there's a Tempranillo available currently and a few other alternative varieties. But for me, that's what's important in the future of Australia. It's making sure that we have a vibrant industry to hand to the next generation. And I think slowly but surely we're realizing that. And I hope that can be our generation's legacy in the future. So yeah, on that note, that's a really pertinent place to finish, I think.
You need to see this comment.
Oh, that's very nice. Apparently we're a perfect
match.
We're a perfect duo. There we go.
Duo.
All right, well, I'll come back and I'll talk about something else, maybe.
Yeah, we need to talk about something else. Did Gerard represent Stoneleigh? Yes, a couple of years ago. You actually do now, so.
Yeah,
still,
okay.
So.
No, I still do. So
you still do, right?
Yeah, our Pernod Ricard, we don't only have Jacob's Creek. We make wine across 8 countries around the world. So we're usually quite a loud voice in the countries that we make wine about. Funnily enough, coming up, we haven't spoken about it, we've got Jamie Marfell, chief winemaker of Stoneleigh, who's going to be doing a live tasting with you.
That would be really fun. We haven't decided on the date yet, but some...
Well, we have.
Some
I need to tell you about that.
Okay, so we have decided a date. We just need to...
We've decided a date. We just need to chat about it and we'll get back to you, okay?
So we will be doing... in April, or?
Yeah.
Okay, so in April we will be doing a tasting with Stoneleigh, and I have the winemaker with me, and there's a kind of, how early in the morning does he have to go up to do this tasting with me?
All winemakers are early morning guys.
Cool. Because he's in New Zealand and I'm here in Sweden.
But it's 12 hours, it's
12
perfect.
Hours. Okay, so, and...
Thanks for tasting, guys.
Thanks for tasting with us.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Next week, nästa vecka, så ska vi snacka Nebbiolo på we're talking about Nebbiolo. Och det är inte vilken dag som helst, utan it's on my birthday. So, jag kommer fira min födelsedag. I love the Swedish English here.
Yeah.
On my birthday I will do Nebbiolo together with my friend Ulrika Ferlin that lives in Piemonte. Alltså min vän Ulrika Ferlin som bosatt i Piemonte. Okay, let's do this. Thank you very much everyone.
No worries. Cheers guys, thanks for tasting.
Thanks for tasting.